welcome back, everyone. Today, I sat down with Jamil to talk about his background in engineering and what got him into blockchain. And we discussed why making a difference is hugely important to him. Talked about digital ownership and how he balances his long hours immersed in tech with reconnecting to the physical world around him. It's such a juicy conversation, and I hope that you enjoy it. As a PS, I'm a little under the weather right now, but I hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Jamil as much as I did. Jamil, welcome to Unraveling Crypto.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on. Excited to be here.
It's such a pleasure. Before we get started, I just want to start with maybe like a way to ground and connect. And I love to do that with what are you grateful for at this moment?
What am I grateful for? So many things right now. I mean, I think just being able to work on the problems that I find that are meaningful in a place that I love, in a city that I'm grateful for, and for the Stacks community, and to just be around people like you and others in the community that are just give me so much energy and so much excitement to do what I'm doing.
Yeah, I always love to start with like gratitude. Just it always brings us back to the present moment after like a crazy day. I would love for you to just share a little bit about who you are and what you're doing right now.
Yeah, well, I guess that's a very open-ended question, but
Loaded.
yeah. Um, so I guess my background has always been in I've always enjoyed building things. It's kind of an engineering cliche, but that's genuinely what I've always loved to do. From high school, I remember when, the first iPhone came out, and the first thing I just loved to do was, jailbreak the phone and write apps even before the App Store came out, and learning how to code and learning how to build things on this, magical new device and magical new platform. And that's how I got started. And that's sort of being able to see, at a earlier age, how people can use what you're building and start using what you're creating, and you just noticing that this is how you can make an impact in the world and make an impact on people, and actually make a difference in their lives was a big thing that sort of propelled me into computer science. And likewise, so that's why I, sort of studied computer engineering in university, and then eventually getting into machine learning, working at my dream company, Apple, at the time, to continue that sort of uh, pattern of trying to make an impact on the user experience, on how people use their devices and interact with technology. And that's sort of what brought me here today too, because I noticed a lot of problems in the Stacks ecosystem when I first got into it. Had a great community, had a great group of people, had an amazing set of diverse artists, but the existing platforms that were on Stacks were charging artists extremely high fees. They were, locking out people. There was no place to like see all of your NFTs in one place. And it was kind of like this is one of those chances where you see that opportunity to make that impact on people and on artists and on collectors, and to make a difference. And so it was almost a no-brainer, like, hey, this is what I've been doing for my whole life, and I know an opportunity to make a difference and to build something useful. And so that's essentially how Gamma started.
So I can't wait to dive into Gamma. But before then, what's your superpower? So that thing that comes to you effortlessly that you can do no matter what.
That's a good question. I think honestly, a lot of what I do takes a lot of effort. I'm always envious of people that can just come into a situation and they have a natural talent and they can just like go, and like you're like, how did you know how to do that? And sometimes they're just like, well, I can just do it. I I think most of what I do, whether it's technical or otherwise, has been a long slog. Some people have said, for example, I remember in my first internship, I I had a presentation. I'll skip to the final presentation. I got to present to like vice presidents at Apple and like very senior people. And afterwards, I got a lot of compliments. Where did you learn all of those presentation skills? Or like, how did you build this? And what they didn't see was like me sitting with my manager up until like 10 p.m., working on this and practicing and rehearsing and just repeating and repeating and it I think a lot of things that have come into my life have been very intentional, very it's taken a lot of work to get to where I am, even if it's not, where necessarily I want to be. Although the one thing that I will say that I feel like I I I have a pattern that I think I should be a bit more appreciative of is identifying some of those patterns of where those gaps are and where the future is going quite early. I'm always an early adopter in technology. I remember like I joined Twitter in like 2007. I was like early on in the iPhone development. I was always like I think I know I may not be able to like always build the best things, but I think I have a good eye for knowing when something is good when I see it. I remember like even it went back in early university. I was like, we were going to a conference, and nobody back then had heard of Uber or any of these, right? Back then it was just Uber, and back then it was a Secret Service looking guy in a big Chevy Suburban, and that's what Uber was. It was no Uber X. It was like a proper like black car only, and so I think that's one thing that I sort of appreciate is I appreciate good technology and good experiences when I see them.
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of how you started with Gamma. So, can you tell us a little bit about what Gamma is and what inspired you?
Yeah, so I think it what inspired me to build it is not a grand story. It was a very pragmatic one, and one that I kind of alluded to earlier, which is there were existing platforms that were gouging artists, that were being very extractive out of the community. They were figuring out, how can I make the most money off of people, and how can I charge the most commissions, and how can I like copy derivative art and then publish it in order to charge people hundreds of dollars for work that they didn't even do. And you clearly know that something is wrong here and that there's an opportunity to do better. And so it was a very pragmatic reason of, there's a gap here. I want to build something useful. And it wasn't about the money, right? Like, not about building something that can make the most money, but building something that I was personally annoyed at these things. So I wanted to build something that was better. And so that's how this started. I actually didn't know much about NFTs or crypto or anything like that. I dabbled in crypto for years, Bitcoin since 2014, never made any money off of it or anything, but I never really dove in deeply. And I don't think you can really understand the technology until you just take the plunge and dive in deeply. So over time, I've also developed a set of principles and values that have come out of that original idea of building something useful for artists and for creators, and now focusing more deeply on, that's what makes an NFT marketplace what it is, right? It's the ability to showcase the art that these creators are making, and to be able to introduce a sense of connection between collectors. So, for example, one of the things that we built from day one, which even OpenSea doesn't do, is like just being able to go to gamma.io/jamil.btc. That's my decentralized identity. That's how everybody knows me on Twitter, on Discord, and that's how I showcase who I am as a collector. My memberships, my collections, my art, that's all on there. And to be able to connect with other people in the same way, in the way that you know and you care about them in the real world, in Twitter, on Discord, I think is an important part of the way we build our platform. So providing value, in summary, to both the artists, making sure that they can release their work and showcase their work in a way that's open, low fee, and easy, and without the need for a developer, importantly. And secondly, to communicate very clearly the community aspect of NFTs and allow people to interact based on their NFTs and sort of more of your social platform.
Yeah, and that's quite powerful. And but could you share with us what are NFTs? I know that's a buzzword, and many of us are seeing them. But what are NFTs and also what's their value?
Yeah, I think if you ask 10 people about what NFTs are, they will give you 10 different answers. And that sort of speaks to the nature of them as well. If I were to ask you, sort of what is an object, you can't really answer that so well. But what I think is important is to understand that in the physical world, you have a very clear sense of ownership. I own this piece of art. It's in my house. I have it in my possession. If someone tries to steal it from me, I can call the police and they can try to get it back. In the digital world, up until now, we didn't really have an analog for that. If you own something in a game or if you own something on a website, you don't actually own that. The company that's managing it can take it from you at any time. If you have a Netflix subscription, they can turn that off at any time, right? If you have certain in-game assets on Steam or something like that, you just bought some games, they can take it from you at any time. And so we're so used to owning things and being comfortable with owning things in the real world that we haven't realized that we've completely given that up in the digital world. That we've sort of are used to this environment where you don't own anything. Like these companies that you feel like you're paying money to, you don't have any of those in your possession and they can be gone in an instant. And so NFTs fundamentally change that. It means that suddenly, just like you can own something in the physical world, and nobody can steal these atoms from me, nobody can steal this phone from me at this point in time. Now we have the same thing in the digital world. Where with NFTs, nobody can steal that from me. And that's very, very powerful. Like no one person can just say, you no longer own this. And from there, you can branch out into so many different possibilities. And that's why you get so many different answers to what is an NFT, because it's really just a technology that enables something else. And the technology is a real digital ownership. And from there, you can go in so many different directions. And the space of possibilities is really endless.
Yeah. What are like, would you say, what are like the successes or NFT projects that have been successful? Why have they been, or what have their utility? What utilities do they offer?
I think the main thing is often, and I don't think people think about this, is when you see the early adoption of a technology like the internet, the first use cases were really community based. You saw, for example, Usenet groups, which were like email groups basically where people could talk back and forth and find a tribe, a group of people that they really identified with, that they could have discussions with. And I think early on in NFTs, that's almost the lowest friction thing that you can experience is the community aspect. And that's sort of where we see the first examples of digital ownership become very important. Because now I can be part of this community that nobody really governs, you're a member or you're a member. You can permissionlessly trade an NFT, buy one, and you're part of that community. You're part of that group of people in a way that nobody can sort of select and say, I only want these people or I only want those people. And so we saw that sort of emerge as the first big use case for NFTs in like Bored Ape Yacht Club and communities like that, where you suddenly find a group of people that share your values, that you can have fun with, that you can meet up in real life or in the digital world with. And that's, I think, only the beginning, right? That's like the first seed of what the possibilities are, just like in the internet when you first had those Usenet groups and those discussion groups. You'll start to see more fundamental uh, use cases come up, and you're already starting to see a few of those, where now you're starting to see club memberships, right? Whether it's golf or wineries or whatever, and you're starting to see subscriptions for software. Just like I told you, Netflix can steal just take away your subscription at any time. Now you're starting to see companies invent better models for modeling how they make money over subscriptions and how they represent ownership over their product. And again, you're just going to see this like explosion, this sort of funnel of use cases. That you start from those simple community based use cases to like subscriptions and ownership, and you're going to have more and more stacked on top of that.
So there's different types of NFTs, and of course, like what makes NFTs on Bitcoin special?
Yeah, I think NFTs actually first started on Bitcoin with platforms like Counterparty. I think, and even before that, stuff like colored coins, which was the idea that some Bitcoin can be actually different than others. and that makes it non-fungible, right? You can't exchange this Bitcoin for another Bitcoin transaction, essentially. Um, I think one of the things that is important when you talk about uh, I said no central authority can steal this digital asset from you. That comes from the consensus algorithm, which is the root of what a blockchain is. Who decides what blocks get mined? And Bitcoin's innovation was that there is no central authority that decides what blocks get mined. It's all a permissionless protocol where anybody can come in as a miner and no one transaction can be censored unless 51% of the miners have the power. And right now it's much more decentralized than 51%. So the platform that you're building on affects those security guarantees. It affects whether your platform is truly decentralized or not. And Bitcoin is the most decentralized out of all the blockchains that are out there. It has the most distribution over mining power, has the strongest security guarantees with proof of work. And I think people forget that underlying all of this, we're building this for a reason, and that's to ensure that your ownership, your digital ownership, is secure and safe, just as the stuff in your home is secure and safe. And there is no better place to do that on Bitcoin. It doesn't. You feel like it doesn't matter until it matters, and someone steals it from you. So I think building on the most secure platform is very important in ensuring that your assets are safe and secure.
Okay, so I want to kind of like pick your brain on something because when I first got into the space, I would hear a lot of like the miners, and I thought miners before knowing. I'm like, who are the miners? What are they doing? So can you just share a little bit or like an example that gives a bit of context about what miners are?
Yeah. So what happens is what a blockchain is essentially what it sounds like. It's a chain of blocks, and each block basically records a set of transactions or a set of events that happen. So if I say, "Hey, I want to send Vane this NFT," right? I can send a transaction saying, "I'm sending this to you." Now, I'm the only one that can send a transaction like that. Nobody else can say, "I'm sending Jamil's NFT to someone else." I'm the only one that can do that. Um, and what a miner does is they include that transaction in one of those blocks that forms the history of the blockchain. And what's nice about this is you can go back from the tip of the blockchain all the way to the end and say exactly what happened at each moment. And you can trace the history back all the way to the original Bitcoin, right? All the way to the original Genesis block. And so what's great about this is that it ensures that at any point in time, you know exactly where things were. You can trace back that this person really owned these assets, that this person had the permission to transfer these assets, and verify that everything was secure. And miners are the ones responsible for adding to those blocks and including your transaction in that larger blockchain.
Okay, this I think everyone listening to this is gonna really appreciate this. So thank you for that. What would you like if you can explain what Stacks is to the community as well?
Yeah, so I think one of the things with Bitcoin is that it was invented to be primarily, although not exclusively, a peer to peer electronic cash, which is like the title of the Bitcoin white paper. And what this meant is that Bitcoin does something really well, which is that it tracks ownership over amounts really well. So it says, like, I have 2 Bitcoin or you have three. And that's through a record of transactions. So I can spend this much Bitcoin and you can spend this much Bitcoin. And it records that very well. But what the original Bitcoin protocol struggles with a little bit is more extended use cases beyond that. So that means recording things like uh, non-fungible asset ownership, right? Like NFTs, like art, or more complex representations. And so what Stacks does is it builds on top of Bitcoin to allow Bitcoin to represent those more complex behavior, like what we see in the world of decentralized finance or fine art. And all of these things can now be represented in the same way and with the same security guarantees that Bitcoin has. So Stacks just makes Bitcoin more powerful or more flexible in a way.
And coming back to why would you recommend someone to first experience Web3 and crypto with Stacks versus other?
Yeah, I think there are a few reasons. Some are principles, and some are. I like to split this up into like why should you build on Stacks in theory, and why should you build on Stacks, or why should you come to Stacks in practice. And in theory, we went over some of that, which is the security of Bitcoin and all of that. But you might ask, well, how does that make a difference in my real life? Like, why should I actually download the Hero wallet and start trading NFTs on Stacks? And I think some of that is the principles, but there are also very pragmatic reasons to do it too. The transaction fees are extremely low right now on Ethereum. I think I've spent like thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars on transaction fees alone on Ethereum, whereas on Stacks you'll spend less than $1. So it's a really like low fee, easy way of getting into the blockchain if you've been priced out of Ethereum's transaction fees, which can be a huge issue in accessibility in Web3. When we want to enable more people to be able to use these platforms, we need to make it affordable. It's affordable on several levels too. You can get NFTs, you can play around in the ecosystem for not much money compared to Ethereum, which is really like this almost it shuts out people that are just trying to get into Web3. Stacks is a much more open, much more permissionless protocol, sort of in the line of Bitcoin. And the other reason I think is the other pragmatic reason is the people. I think on a lot of other blockchains, you see people that are in it for the money or in it to flip or in it to just try and be as extractive or make the most money as possible. But I think on Stacks, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this too, because I know you've been involved in the community quite a bit. Is I find people are very helpful, very open, very appreciative, and just out there to inform, to help, and to just make friends together. And I really love that about Stacks and about the community here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I came into the space. I knew about crypto and I knew about Web3 for a while now, but coming into Stacks was wonderful because everybody is so welcoming. And I had very little knowledge, and I would message in DMs and then go on Twitters, and everybody would be like, yeah, just schedule a call with me. I mean, I know maybe now it's not as, like, maybe not the same, but it was really great to just be connecting with one on one. And then you make friends along the way too. You connect with different people. And if it wasn't for Stacks, I don't think I would have been creating Unraveling Crypto either. So it all aligns really perfectly. And for me, I would definitely recommend everyone come in and experience, because it's the right time to do so with Stacks. What would you say are the differences between, like, if somebody is curious about coming into Web3, like, what are the main differences between Web2 and Web3?
Yeah, I think there's often this sort of uh, Chris Dixon, I think, puts it this way. Because Web 1 is all about reading, right? Web 1 is like the original era of the internet where you sort of consume things. And this is what we're used to, right? In the early days of the internet, this is what we did. We would, read, Wikipedia, when that came out, or we'd read the news, or this is what the first value proposition of the original internet was. This is how we get information. And this is how people explain the internet in the first era. You just pull out something from, you pull out your computer, or even to the point of like, 2007, that sort of era, 2008, before the age of social media. It was really, you use this to get informed about things. And even when you look at the use cases for the first iPhone or things like that, it's all about how I consume things. And for Web 2, it's also about writing. So Web 1 is read, and Web 2 is like read and write. So now I'm posting to Twitter, I'm posting to Facebook. And that was sort of this 2007, 2008 to today period where it's about how you interact with other people on the internet as well. The problem with that is that companies will find a way to make money off of you, make money off of the way that you're reading, the way that you're writing, and target advertisements to you and try to sell you things. And Web 1 is read, Web 2 is read and write, and Web 3 is read, write, and own. So now, just going back to our first topic of what NFTs are, it's about ownership, digital ownership. And now both what you consume and what you create can be owned as well. And now, like, artists are no longer being exploited for no pay or low wages, that can actually make money off of their work on the internet in a completely decentralized way. And when you write on platforms like Mirror or Seigel, you can also own what you write as well. It doesn't belong to the platform, it belongs to you. And I think this is one of the central tenets of Web3, is that you not only read and write, you also own what you're doing on the internet and you own your assets. And that is a fundamental change from the Web2 way of doing things, where the companies and the platforms that are providing this have ownership over you and your content.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's one of the best explanations that I've always also heard and seen, and I love the way that he explains it. And thank you for that. So, what are you loving most about the space right now? What's like lighting you up?
I like to put it this way a little bit. I think it might be a bit of a long-winded answer, but I'm an aviation nerd as well, and like I'm also like a casual pilot, and it's always been like a field that's been really interesting to me. And when you look at where aviation was when the Wright brothers came out, right? When the Wright brothers invented the first airplane, you had this thing that looks completely different from the jet airplanes of today.
Hmm.
But so you saw 50 years of this incredible innovation where you go from this like canvas biplane to aircraft that can cross oceans in 50 years, right? Literally 50 years, from 1903 to 1953. But the aircraft that we look at today look very similar to the aircraft that existed in 1953 or 1963. In fact, some of them are the same models that existed back then. So you had this first 50 years of incredible innovation, and we sort of figured things out, and now we don't really need to play with it too much. And in this space, in Web3, we're at a point where sorry, I'm getting a call. We're at a point where we're still very early. And I remember even when we talk about phones, so cell phones, right? It's the same thing. I remember when I was in grade school, everybody had a different type of cell phone. Some people had ones that, slid out and you had like keyboards here. Some people had
Yeah,
Blackberries.
side pick.
Had those. Yeah, exactly. Some people had the flip phones still where you had to like hit, the keys multiple times to text. And we sort of like, I think we take that period for granted a little bit. It's kind of magical to think about that huge design space and all these different options. And back then, it wasn't clear who would win, right? Or which pattern would win, or that even that era would have ended, right? Like we probably, if we thought back then, today we'd have the same diversity of phones, right? Or the same diversity of technology. But no, we don't. Every time someone takes out a phone, it looks exactly like this, whether you're
Yeah.
using an iPhone or an Android phone or whatever, it looks like a slab of glass, right? And it took us a while to get there. It didn't happen all at once. Just like with the airplane, it didn't go from like the canvas biplane to the jet engine in one day. And nobody in 1903 knew that that's where planes would end up. And right now in Web3, we're at a similar point where nobody knows where we're going to be in 5 years. Look, NFTs just took off last year, and we'd be foolish to think that this is where things will end up. And what we're doing right now is the end period. No, this is actually the most exciting time in a space where we'll get a ton of things wrong. We will invent our
Yeah.
sidekicks and our feature flip phones, and there will be problems, and there will be things that go wrong. But this is exactly that point in time where you need that era of experimentation, of trying new things, of figuring out what works and what doesn't, because in a way, everybody that's building in Web3 is playing their role in inventing the future, and we don't know what that looks like until we build it.
Yeah. And what would you say is lacking or is still missing in the space? I mean, of course, of the innovation, but currently, right now, what would you like to see happening?
Yeah, I think this might be the nature of the people that come into the space as well. Is you get people that have a very strong sense of what should be right and the principles of blockchain and cryptocurrencies and the decentralization. But in the end, as a user, as a person who's using these platforms, the only thing I care about is how you make this useful to me in a clear and compelling way, and how you make the experience a delightful one. Right now, we haven't really nailed that in crypto. I think people still are unclear on the value proposition. They haven't found that use case that's like, here is how it improves my life in a tangible way that affects millions of people. We found things that affect artists, that allow people to get their communities, that affect hundreds of thousands of people or tens of thousands of people. But now it's making that next step and developing these platforms that now bring that freedom and ownership to millions and billions of people. And for that, we need more diversity of opinion, of thought, of people in the space. We have to get away from the existing sort of thought patterns that are coming in of how we're building from the technology up. And we really have to build from the user and the user experience up with the same principles that we've established of decentralization and ownership.
Yeah. And what would you say, like, what advice would you give someone that has heard about NFTs and wants to create in the space? Like, what's the first thing that they should do?
I think mainly it's hard to explain from day one. I think just like if you asked, for example, an artist who is coming from the traditional art world with studios and galleries and things like that, there's so much that you need to be familiar with that I have no idea about in that traditional art world, say, right? Of like how you start to get your work exhibited at a gallery, how do you talk to people, what sort of art styles are in fashion, and what sort of payment structure or commissions, and like who should I know and who should I talk to? And it's almost the same sort of patterns and dynamics that come out in NFTs as well. I think there's no like one size fits all formula. It's just a matter of talking to as many people as you can and understanding where the space is today. What are the best avenues to get your work out there? What we've tried to do at Gamma is make it as easy from the technical side as possible because we know there's so much else that needs to be done to get your artwork out there. As an artist, for example, a traditional artist, you don't need to worry about code. You don't need to worry about all of that. And we want to get rid of that. Like I want to code my job away. My job shouldn't exist. I should just be like artists should just be able to go from their work to selling it and getting it out there as quickly as possible without anybody in between. Um, but there's still so much that you need to know to be able to get to that point of how you build up a community, how you build up, traction for your art, how do you get the message out there, and all of these things are an integral part of the NFT sort of experience and flow.
Yeah, so one of the things I always say is like you just have to connect with the people and know what's going on before creating anything. And that goes for any place that you go. You need to know or understand it a little bit more. Um, so moving away from Web3 and what you do, what else do you love to do that's outside of work?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I over the past few months, it hasn't been really too much outside of work, but um,
Same.
there are a few things that I enjoy. I like to get. I think a lot of people uh, have very much like they like to play games on the computer or something. But I honestly like after I spend 12 hours every day, like 7 days a week at a computer, that's the last thing I want to see. And so I really enjoy the outdoors. I really enjoy going hiking, skiing, mountaineering a little bit. Although I'm not fit enough for that anymore. Um, I enjoy flying, as I mentioned. I haven't done it in a few months, but it's something that I really used to enjoy too. It was another way to sort of connect with something physical, flying a plane and just getting a new perspective on the same places that we know and enjoy on the ground, and also them just being like a very physical experience. You actually feel the air that's coming across the wing and the ailerons and the pressure that you feel. It's a very nice physical experience. It's very different from coding or anything like that on the computer.
Yeah,
Um,
that is really cool.
the other thing that I've been enjoying is this is more on the technical side, but my background is in machine learning, so I really enjoy more on if I do have more like a computer based or a hobby like that, and if I get extra time, I really do enjoy learning more and just being intellectually curious about ML, the most recent papers that are coming out. I used to do like I don't know how I kept up with this, but like writing summaries of one ML paper per day for a while, and so those are a couple of things I enjoy doing. Although I haven't been able to do much of the more academic stuff in a little while.
Yeah. So, I mean, Web3 moves so fast, and the technology, any technology really, and I think life in general too, just flies by. But what do you do that grounds you, or what do you do other than what you explained? Is there anything else that you do for self care?
Yeah, I think the main thing is that you have to like we weren't meant to sit at a computer, for this long, or we weren't meant to like stare at our phones or stare at a pane of glass for this long. And this is actually something that I feel like I also want to work on longer term too, is I feel like there are probably better ways of exposing the benefits of technology without all of the negative mental and physical health effects that technology has on us today, whether it's social media or just the physical effects of looking at a screen or sitting in a certain position for so long every day. And so I think even though it's small, like just being able to get out for physical, exercise to stimulate the body in the way that it's meant to be, being around nature, going for walks, going for runs. I think that's a very important part, especially if you spend so much time at a computer.
Yeah. So we're wrapping up, but before we go, I'd love to do a lightning round, which is a series of questions that you can just answer as quickly and concise as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
Let's do it. So the first one is, what's your favorite book?
My favorite book. Oh, that's a question. Good question. I'll go with It's called Gödel Escher Bach by Douglas Hofstadter, and it's like an exploration on math and eventually consciousness, and that sort of goes back to my
Ooh,
AI background.
that's cool. So one piece of advice that the world needs to know right now.
uh, don't complain. I think is the biggest one. There's so much negativity on social media and things like that, but our power to impact the world is enormous, right? You have the ability to affect so much change. So I think that's
Your go-to drink.
uh, Boulevardier is my go-to drink. If it's a cocktail bar, that's um, Campari, sweet vermouth, and bourbon.
Oh, and one thing you can't stand.
One thing I can't stand. Uh, I think it goes back to the like people who are just obsessively negative. I can't deal with that. I think if you're negative, then you find solutions and find ways to fix it. Yeah,
Yeah. And what do you value most right now?
that's another great question. I think like it's starting to become this kind of cliche answer too, but time. It's limited, and we have to choose what the biggest impact we can make is in the limited time that we have. And right now, I've tried to become much more intentional about that. How do I use every moment to make the biggest impact or to work on the problems that I find are most meaningful?
Mm. And what do you love most about yourself?
That's another tough question. Um, yeah, I think my willingness to take risks, I think, is one thing that I've started to try to cultivate more in myself and also try to appreciate more. Just like again, life is short, so try something new and try and make a difference. Don't settle for just doing things day to day because it's expected of you.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. And one piece of advice that you can give to anyone listening, and how they can get involved, or what's the first step you would like? What's your invitation for them, basically?
I think everybody tends to undervalue the skill sets that you have. I just got off this Twitter space where all of these artists were saying, "Well, my job is the easy part. The technical work is hard, or the community building is hard, or the project management is hard." And everybody thinks that they're like, and to me, that's just so ridiculous because I've been, you know, uh, uh, working with artists in this space, and the amount of work they put into their craft is incredible, and the amount of skill and effort that goes into refining that craft is amazing. And people tend to undervalue what they bring to the table. And I think one thing is sort of a call to action is everybody wants to see the world in a better place. Everybody wants to see things change. And the truth is that the skills that you have are most likely more impactful and more meaningful than you think. And everybody can make a big difference in sort of bringing that to fruition. I think we've become a culture that's been so negative. It says there's nothing we can do. But I think everybody brings so much to the table. Um, to me, like the engineering is even, and I'm sort of doing this myself. I'm like, the engineering is easy. It's everything else that's important, right? And it's true. Like everybody brings something to the table. And if you see a brighter future, or if you see a problem, or you see that something that you need to change, you know, figure out a way to bring your skills and make that difference.
I think we ended on a really positive and high note. Jamil, thank you so much. Before you go, where can people connect with you and hang out?
Yeah, so my probably Twitter is the best way. That's how I've always, sort of interacted with people.
Yes.
It's Jamil, Jamil BTC. So at Jamil BTC is my Twitter handle.
Yeah. So actually, before you go, you is Gamma also on Instagram, correct? A lot of the listeners are there, so I'll link that in our show notes as well.
Yeah, and Gamma's also on Twitter too at TryGamma.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jamil, thank you so much. I so appreciate you taking the time.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much, man.